calling it Women's Equity, that she's doing in Manitoba and I'm doing in Silicon Valley. I started the Women's Network 2017. At the same time, myself and some other expat Canadians started a network to support Canadian life science companies. I sit on the board of Innovate Edmonton, became a publisher of this magazine earlier this year, and I do some startup advising. The way I got into supporting Canadian companies is my time at C100 when I ran it for 2 years from 2014 to 16. And prior to that, being in the Bay Area since 99, used to do some large ERP consulting with Deloitte, worked with a couple of startups in the Bay Area, certainly not Google, Apple, Facebook, or anything like that. And some deep background in the nonprofit space as well, having run it. I grew up in Northern Alberta in a town called High Level, which a little bit different than High River. And I grew up on a farm up there. And I love to run and drink wine, not at the same time. So a bit about what it is that Connection Silicon Valley does and what has spawned all of these things that we do. So at the core, we're trying to help connect Canadian companies into Silicon Valley to help them grow and scale. All the work that we do is at that intersection based upon the network that I've built since 1999, but really deeply since 2014. We've run 16 different accelerator programs with 180 companies. We have leveraged, no kidding, over 500 mentors that have showed up and spoken for us, provided one-on-one mentorship, small group workshops, roundtables, different things like that throughout all of our programming. We have a US investor network of over 600 folks, and we have identified at least 50 companies that have either secured funding, access to a global accelerator, a mentorship, formal advisory, or board director roles through our connections. And we don't sadly keep track of that stuff. We do a lot of connections, but it's really hard to keep track of that. So we're really all about helping early stage founders on their path to growth. For us, early stage is generally product in market, under $1 million in revenue, some form of traction or milestones that they're working towards, and with their sights on ideally building a global business, because that's more where Silicon Valley sits, but we certainly support Canadian companies that are just on their path of growth. We feel like the Valley has a lot to offer from the experiences here to help companies, no matter what their sort of size or growth expectations are. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these to give you a brief insight, but overviewing of sort of our initiatives. So the Women's Network was started to help support female-led founders with access to Silicon Valley on their path to growth. And we've been operating since 2017 with 3 immersion programs in Silicon Valley pre-COVID, and we've launched an online community earlier this year. This is where WEHK has supported us. Thank you again so much. It was at a very critical stage for us because this has been philanthropy side of my desk since 2017, with a lot of people volunteering their time as well. So earlier this last year, we formed a board. The board, like at the pushing of my connectors, as I called them, the 30 women that I tapped on their shoulder in 2017 and asked if they'd join me on this journey. Many of them close said, you got to do this, but make it a sustainable business because it's not sustainable as it is. So that is a lot of where we spend our time focusing. The Women's Equity Lab is a collaborative investment model that we're pretty excited about that started out of Victoria. Is in Vancouver and Kelowna, with chapters in Manitoba, Toronto, and Silicon Valley. And I'm really excited about this network because it is about educating women and getting them more into angel investing, as well as, for us, every chapter might be a little different, but our thesis will be at least 70% investment into female-led companies. And we are just at that beginning part. I'll speak a little bit more about that. We used to do Silicon Valley immersion programs. Come down for a week, you drink from the fire hose, we introduce you, we help you build a network, you get the consistent mindset, you get people that can help you on your business, and then you go home. And now with COVID, of course, all of our things are virtual. So right now we actually have this 5-month accelerator program that we're doing the second phase for in Alberta, or the second time of it. And it's something that we're going to replicate in other veins as well. But it's specifically focusing again on that early stage company that is looking for a fundraise in the next kind of 6 to 9 months. So we really work through them through product market fit and their go-to-market and, who their customer is, as well as be bringing in, investors to talk about what they would be looking at. So it's a 10-week workshop series for phase 1, 30 companies can participate. And then it's a phase 2 where we select 10 companies to work one-on-one with them in more of a mentorship format. Underneath the Canadian Women's Network, launching tomorrow is something called Founded in Canada, where we're going to select 12 Canadian female-based companies in a specific industry in order to showcase them, and they'll be able to pitch to a US network of investors. It's something that we hope to replicate in the future. The Canadian Entrepreneurs in Life Sciences is something that as well has been around since 2017. I'm a founding board member of that. We're in our 3rd cohort program for Canadian life sciences businesses, and that's very broadly diagnostics, medical device, biotech, therapeutics. And that's a 4-month program with workshops as well as mentor assignments to those companies. And we crazily took over this Disruption magazine that has 90,000 subscribers on it. That was built out of Edmonton originally. And the organization kind of with COVID and everything used to be a physical magazine that they would take to conferences, and it was an IT service provider that had grown it. And the woman that really built it up, the managing editor, I got connected to through my women's network. And so they were looking for a new home. This felt like a nice extra bridge to be able to connect all the great talent and things that are happening in Canada into, again, my network in the Valley. And I'd say increasingly global, since people are moving out of the Valley pretty quickly these days. And last, a bit about work, we do some consulting with startups that are looking, to rapidly kind of scale themselves, that are usually looking for a fundraise, but it gives us the opportunity to work with them, because I consistently get, hey, Joanne, I'm fundraising. Who do you know? Like all the time, I get that question without any information about the startup, and they might not even know me. They're just like, I heard your name and I'm coming to the Valley. Who do you know? So we really try to help companies early on get to know them so that we can vouch for them and be able to open them up to our network of investors, because a warm introduction is the best way to go when it comes to fundraising. And then for the last 3 years, I've actually been Alberta's representative in the Valley to both drive foreign direct investment into the region. I think we've brought 7 companies in, and to help Alberta startups access Silicon Valley. Makes sense from my roots. So a little bit about the CWN community. We have 200 members on our online platform. We use a platform called Mighty Networks. We launched in January of this year. I'll talk about like the benefits and the things that they get out of it. Is really, we do the same things that we would do in our immersion program physically in the Valley. We've basically brought online. So they can do one-on-one pitching to investors, small group pitches. You can get one-on-one mentorship. We've got the roundtables, workshops, sort of founder forums, webinars, those kinds of things. We've been heavily focused on that founder looking on a fundraising path. And we're just, as we go into kind of end of this year and into next year, really we'll start to add more soft skills, leadership, HR, maybe more functional areas of support and expertise as well within kind of the program offerings. I didn't know what a beast it is to launch something like this, even though the platform isn't ours and we have to manage it. Just like, gosh, the plugins and the connectivity and the automation and all the things, it's quite a bit of stuff. So the support that we've received from WEKH has been tremendous. We've also got BDC support, both Capital, Artemis, and super cool what Edmonton Regional Innovation Network did, the ear in there it's called. They actually sponsored it so that any Edmonton-based female entrepreneur can get access to the platform for free. We offer a 3-month free trial, 6 months. We're pretty liberal with this. And then there's a $25 monthly fee, which we've had. And we're looking at more of a tiered system going into the end of the year and into next year as we kind of figure out, where exactly our value prop is and differentiator, what the members are enjoying, what they want to see. And again, being able to offer some of these things more I guess, allowing companies that need some more one-on-one, that opportunity for those types of relationships out there. So if you're a free member, you'd be able to attend like the group pitch, but only a paid member would be able to get like the one-on-one pitching or one-on-one mentorship kind of thing. And our target audience are Canadian female founders, those that identify as female, gender non-binary, all of those things, but as well as women on leadership teams of startups, or even aspirational entrepreneurs, those that might be working in a startup or maybe even in a corporate that are very interested in the technology and startup and innovation world and might be wanting to get into it. And then we also are building out our partner network of other accelerators. Investor network is sort of a next one for us that are helping to promote it. We consider WEHK also in this category in order to, again, where are places where there are strong populations of female founders or women in tech, and be able to invite them into our network. Our Founded in Canada series, again, this is focused on female founders. We've selected the food and ag tech space. For the first one, it'll be on December 2nd. We've got a US network of investors that will on that day do 2 small group roundtables, like 3 startups or 2 startups with like 3 investors in it for 90 minutes to hear feedback. We'll do that twice. And then our sponsors and partners will help prepare those startups for that pitch and look over their business plan and help give them some guidance. So our deadline for applications is, I believe, around October 2nd or 10th. We'll select the companies pretty quickly, and then we'll have a little bit over a month to work with them before this showcase that'll happen on December 2nd. Once we do this program, we would love to be able to do it more in 2022 in just different industries or maybe in technology areas. And the Women's Equity Lab, super quick. So again, collaborative investment model. The target for us in Silicon Valley is 30 female investors. The investment amount is higher than what is happening in Canada just due to the Valley, which is $15,000 to invest. With that, we'll do 2 to 3 rounds of investments per year. So you basically deploy all of that capital within 1 year. This is very much a collaborative and interactive investment model. So the LPs, those 30 female investors, will get involved with everything from the sourcing and the selecting, the due diligence and the startup relationships as they have time and see fit and interest level. We know all 30 won't get involved in all of these things, but that is the invitation to them. And with that, we're going to have 8 to 10 kind of educational webinars and workshops throughout the year. And this is where we're also going to open it up to not just the investors, but really it is to inspire more women to get knowledgeable about angel investing, to get familiar with startups, to see those women-led companies pitching and what they're offering out there. So those will have open to other folks to be able to attend. I believe that's it. So we've got 8 minutes left and happy to answer any questions you might have. I'll stop sharing my screen.
I think it falls to me to ferry questions, so I'm happy to do that. And then in about 10 minutes, we're going to hear from Wendy Cukier, and Deborah will introduce her more fully. So this is just fascinating and such an array of amazing initiatives, Joanne. It's so nice to hear about them directly from you. So yes, Manitoba can and is involved and can get more involved, I'm sure. Who has questions for Joanne? Just throw open your mic, or if we get interruptions, you can use the hand up function. Anybody?
Any synergies with what you guys are working on? I didn't have a chance to look at who's all here today. Any ways that we can collaborate? We do a ton to support programming, the efforts that are happening in Canada. We're a highly collaborative group. So if there's initiatives and things that you guys are working on, we've got newsletters, really strong LinkedIn connections. So if there's ways that we can partner and have some shared purpose, we'd love to talk.
So I'll ask a question. So we're running this lab to market program, which is really targeted at graduate students who think that their technology or whatever their research project is might have commercial potential. Does it make sense as part of this? Because this is often pre-company formation, but for the the females in those groups, does it make sense to connect them with you early, or do you want them to actually have formed a company first?
We're actually looking at like some university college partnerships, ways where they can sort of underwrite the cost, kind of like Erin did for entrepreneurs to come into the Canadian Women's Network and get access to all of that programming. I personally, from my bias of living here for 22 years and working so deeply in the Canadian ecosystem, think that it's like so much value to be able to connect into the mindset from here and meet with people early on in an entrepreneur's journey so that they really can see the opportunities for them that exist and really the competitiveness that's out there. We too often get companies that think that they've looked around the competitive landscape and know where they sit and fall, but the reality is they don't look far enough. And somebody like, whether that's an investor in Silicon Valley or even an operator, a founder, I mean, we see so much stuff because the world comes to Silicon Valley to pitch, right? So you see so much where the puck is going years in advance, whereas they don't get that as much with Canada. More so people are coming to Toronto, I understand, in Montreal and Vancouver, but there's still, I think, such a breadth of richness that even at that early stage would be helpful. That validation of what they're looking at. And again, hearing from somebody, that's an interesting idea, but do you know, somebody's just raised $20 million like 6 months ago and has, Tesla as their first customer, right? Like that might change the trajectory of their startup idea. Yeah. So yes, and I think so.
Joanne, I have a question about your Women's Equity Lab.
Yep.
Is it set up the way SheEO is, where it's just a startup investment, or is it kind of a venture capital with an expected return on investment?
Yeah, it's more the VC route with an expected return on it. The first goal is really about educating and getting more women as investors, but right behind that is an actual investment return on it. That again, with the collaborative investment model, everybody invests equally, so they'll all benefit equally from that outcome. But in cases that in Victoria and Vancouver already, and you'll see this in any other kind of angel network, often people will add on more of their own capital or outside of it to be able, if they see an idea that they're really interested in, which is kind of exciting.
Great, lovely. Thank you for the work you're doing. Super.
Thank you.
Tomka.
Hi, just a quick introduction. I'm Tomka. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Asper School, working with Suzanne. And my question is very similar to Darren's question earlier. So I could see like the different programs, there's the accelerator and so on. And I was also wondering if there is something for the very, very early stages, more in terms of like an incubator. Yeah, if there's if one of these programs is for people in the very early stage, or if you're planning to do something. I think you replied to it a little bit to Darren's question, but yeah, just.
Yeah, so we don't do a lot on the ideation piece of it, that true earlier stage incubation. That said, listen, like our group pitches are really great to even be an observer to hear how people are pitching and how investors are thinking. Lots of our webinars and stuff are talking about where a startup is going to go to and get to. So I think that line of sight is incredibly important. But we don't workshop at the ideation stage with that. Now, we do talk about very early stage, how you're forming your business, how you're thinking about another market, because a lot of companies are having a digital product, so they're selling into other regions, not just locally in Canada. So there is information about how am I doing business in other geographies or countries, things like how do I think about stock options, how am I planning out my founder shares? How do I think about building my team? Like, I think all of that is like super applicable to any early stage.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else? Oh, Dulcie, and then Kara. Yeah.
Hi, Joanne. Is there sort of a trend in the different kinds of services that are being targeted for new businesses as we go forward? Like, can we say that there's
The trend is certainly supporting women, and again, women identifying and diversity and whatnot. Like, obviously you're seeing that as well. There's so many more investment funds that have launched, programs that are focused on, diverse minority or populations with it, going a lot, sort of 10 times deeper on folks. As far as the actual programming, it's interesting. I was talking to one of our speakers yesterday, and he just mentioned, I think, in and around the typical VC model, he really liked the Women's Equity Lab approach and was mentioning a group out of BC doing some interesting things with it, more about kind of giving back versus less on the capital return. So a few nuances, definitely, I think, in how venture is investing. We see a lot now where you've got to have a woman on your leadership team, if not on your founding team. You've got to have them on your board. And so we'll sit there with two guys in their garage and be like, this is the first thing you got to do, is go find a woman to get to like, it's true. So sorry, I know we're at time. So
Okay, I'll just let Kara ask her question, and thanks, Joanne.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Joanne, I did lose connection during your presentation there, so I'm not sure if you touched on this. So if you did, please correct me. But I work on the Indigenous portfolio at the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, and we've been doing a lot of work looking into collaborating with partners on doing research into impact investing for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. So I was wondering if you've done any work in regards to Indigenous populations, and if you have, or if not, I would love to set up a meeting with my colleague Ashley so she can hear a bit more about what you do, and maybe there's some room for collaboration in the future.
yeah, absolutely. We would love to. We have not. We've been, I'd say, more reactive than proactive, really in the areas, just building off of a network that I've built since, the last 7 years or so. But I grew up, that population was very prevalent where I grew up, and I would love to be able to find a way to support that community and that network there, those networks there. So let's chat for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joanne. That was super interesting. I'm so glad you could spend this time. Thank you, Dulcie, for bringing Joanne in. And I'm turning it now to Deborah Jonathan-Young to continue with our program.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Joanne. I know that we've got that session recorded, but would it also be possible to have your presentation shared with the membership here?
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. I think it'll be a good reminder of what the possibilities are. And I know that we would have had a couple of other partners, one with Darren Fast, Brenda, who is heading up the Lab to Market program, and I'm pretty sure she'll be interested in hearing some of this. So if we can get that, that would be super. So let's move on. I am very thrilled to be able to introduce somebody who many of you are aware of and know already. Dr. Wendy Cukier is a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy, the founder of the Diversity Institute at Ryerson University. She is the co-author of a best-selling book, Innovation Nation, and former VP of Research and Innovation with more than 200 articles on all aspects of diversity, inclusion, and innovation. Dr. Cukier is one of Canada's leading experts in disruptive technology, innovation processes, and diversity and inclusion. And of course, the Diversity Institute leads up a number of different projects that track the representation of women in leadership roles, and a host of projects focused specifically on women in technology. The Diversity Institute has also pioneered innovative projects such as the Advanced Digital and Professional Training Program, of course, the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, and the Newcomer Entrepreneurship Hub. Wendy and the heads up and leads the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub and a program for research for Future Skills Center, as well as the New Inclusive Innovation and Entrepreneurship Network. That is just a tiny bit of information about Wendy. We're so thrilled to have you here, and we're very fortunate to have her here speaking to us in such an intimate format. So Wendy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Deborah, and good to see those of you I know. Nice to meet those of you I don't, and pleased that Kara and Suzanne and Deborah, who are core to some of the work that we've been doing, are here. And of course, our partners like Joanne and Allison and so on. What I was asked to do was just give highlights of the State of Women Entrepreneurship report from 2001. As all of you can actually read it, I'm going to try to just blast through at a very high level some of the key findings. And Kara and Ashley contributed a section. Suzanne contributed a section. We have a number of sections that were supported by various WEHK members and so on. So I don't think that this will be particularly earth-shattering, but it may be of interest. I think the other thing to just say by way of introduction is the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub is supposed to essentially be the B2B player in the women's entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so most of our work is actually focused on networking and working with organizations that support women entrepreneurs. Some of those are organizations with women in the title, but others are not. So for example, the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce is one of our partners on a couple of projects. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce is another partner. And what we're doing with a lot of the players in the innovation ecosystem is trying to work on strategies to create inclusion. So Winnipeg, for instance, is leader in the 50-30 challenge, which aims at creating gender parity and increased diversity on boards and in leadership roles. And our view is all these different things actually connect together, because if you have gender parity and more diversity in banks, for instance, there is an impact on how banks then treat women and others. So we don't view this as a simple task. We see the investments that are being targeted at women entrepreneurs being critical, absolutely fundamental, but there's so much more money and opportunities out there that, in our view, it's also critically important to think about how we level the playing field when it comes to dealing with mainstream financial institutions, venture capitalists, and so on. So just to kind of preface what we do with a bit of that explanation. And the other thing I will say is, because of the crisis created during COVID, because of our very deep connections, especially with diverse networks of women entrepreneurs, whether we're talking about Black women entrepreneurs or Indigenous women entrepreneurs or those with cognitive differences or in the LGBTQ2S plus community, newcomers, refugees, and so on. We were sort of enlisted in the national effort to roll out support across the country. So for the last few months, we have been more actively engaged in training and workshops and helping channel funds to women entrepreneurs. When the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, for example, launched a national program with emergency relief, we were tasked with trying to make sure that there was good gender representation and broader diversity in the applicants. So we see our role as simply trying to advance diversity and inclusion, particularly with respect to gender in the entire ecosystem, which is sometimes like pinning Jell-O to walls. And we do put a lot of emphasis on using research and evidence to drive programming and practice. So with that, let's see if I can share my screen. That seems to be working. There. And it's a small enough group, I'll invite you to comment or ask questions at any point. And I'll also encourage Suzanne, who is much smarter than me, to add in her commentary. And Kara may also have some pieces to contribute. So I think one of the things our first State of Women Entrepreneurship report last year set, a lot of this is known to everybody. So I will just stress a couple of things that I do think made a big difference. If you look at some of the investments in the budget, shifts in language and so on. So I think one of our biggest contributions from all the research that we did was to really highlight a focus on definitions of women entrepreneurship. Because if you look at the mainstream programming of the federal government, majority owner of a small medium enterprise, or in some cases women-led, which was a little more nebulous. It could mean like one member of a board, 5-member ownership team. But the basic definition that the federal government was operating on in all of its entrepreneurship programming was to focus on small, medium enterprises with employees. And that came out in the general programming, but also with the COVID response. Our point, that's sort of the first 2 bullets, is if you look at SMEs only, about 16% of them are owned by women. But if you look at people who are self-employed, it's over 37%. Suddenly the women appear. So if you use the first definition, there are about 110,000 women entrepreneurs in Canada. If you use the second, there's more than 1 million. And when you look at things like Indigenous entrepreneurs, when you look at Black entrepreneurs, many, many more of them are going to be self-employed than incorporated. So that single insight, I would argue, did help frame some of the programming, did lead to some discussions around who's eligible for what, did open up opportunities, I would argue, for self-employed women to be part of the discussion. So I think that was that insight, not new data, everyone knew it, but we put it together in a way that I think drew attention to this structural inequality that had been created. And I do think that that made, that had an impact. The other thing that I think for us was very, very important, and this affected work we did with, for example, the regional development agencies like WestDev, was to highlight the fact that if you focus on tech, and as much as, you know, the work that Joanne does is transformational, really important. My background's tech. I love tech, live in tech. Joella, 100% there with you. as much as we are very much invested in encouraging more women in tech to be successful, and we know the barriers in that space are quite profound, there is an inherent barrier that is introduced to women entrepreneurs if all of the focus on growth and innovation and funding is on tech. And having been a vice president of research and innovation, again, I saw it all the time where, you know, government would write checks for $5 million on, in fact, the latest one I think was 50 million to a quantum computing company based on an 8% chance they would be successful. Whereas, you know, if you're looking at job creation and innovation, there are a lot of different things that can drive job creation and innovation, especially if you're looking at smaller communities, especially if you're looking at women-led businesses. And, you know, the argument that some at the table may not agree with, for instance, that we made over and over again, is a postdoc not really a job. The universities very much, you know, with their incubation network and so on, have kind of dominated a lot of the discussion around commercialization, IP creation. And if you look at how they count job creations, they will claim a postdoc as a job. Postdoc's not a job because the postdoc disappears as soon as the money dries up. A hairdresser may not be a high paid job, but a hairdresser is a job, a carpenter is a job. So one of the things we started to challenge was around the definitions of jobs that are being created, what innovation really consists of. If you look, for example, at farming, the agriculture is one of the highest users of Internet of Things. They're not issuing patents, you know, they're not commercializing technology. They're using technology to drive transformation. So that's another thing that we really promoted as a result of the research, is to say we need to support women in tech, but we need to recognize that a lot of women entrepreneurs are in very diverse sectors, and we need to support them as well. I see, Michelle, your hand is up. If you had a comment.
Yeah, hey, I just wanted to, say a resounding yes to everything you've just shared in terms of, what we see in terms of women entrepreneurs, in terms of the chamber work I do, and in terms of my own networks of women entrepreneurs. And I'll just say, I wasn't sure how to sort of frame this question or comment in your presentation, Joanne, because it's something I struggle with as an entrepreneur, and I see other women entrepreneurs struggle. So often, I think, as you're pointing out, Wendy, the way we talk about business is not a way that is familiar to many women business owners. So I got a little bit, I thought, looking at the website, an opportunity for high growth companies. I thought, well, what is high growth? Like, high growth for me as a woman entrepreneur, I don't know if my definition of that is the same. And in fact, that's not a huge goal. Growth is, sustainable growth is. And so those are some places where I think we see, for lots of these, whether they're self-employed or if they own a business like I do, the way we've talked about business or the way we approach business is sometimes out of whack. Even things like finding the advisors who can provide me with advice on how to do things in my business that actually respond to my goals. And I'll give you just a very concrete example, and this is very real for me right now. I own my own corporation, having gone through a process over the last year of trying to figure out how to take a mat leave from my own business. The professional advice I got from very well-known multinational firms, accounting firms, was that absolutely I just needed to contribute to EI and I'd be on my way. Well, because of the ownership structure of my business, I cannot. So I, while I'm navigating that, just fine, there's just all kinds of these things, how we think about business, or we collectively is not actually how many of us we think about business. So that was a long rambling comment, but I just wanted to say these are the pieces that I think we really do need to address, and the work you're doing, Joanne, to say to founders of companies, like, you need to have a woman as part of the team is important, because then these questions get surfaced, or these needs get surfaced. So I hope that was helpful. I also have a pretty mushy brain at this point with a 2-month-old at home.
So Joanne, you're muted, but you want to comment?
I just was cheering on versus having a comment per se. I think I've spoken enough. Yeah, thank you though.
Thanks. And I honestly, I think one of the things that's really important is it's not either or, but it's just because I've spent most of my career trying to support women in technology, and the barriers there are massive, and we have to keep doing that. But it's important, I think, just to recognize these structural things that are baked into the system can exclude many of the people that we want to be engaged. And I want to say—
And Wendy, could I just jump back in, because I realized the actual point I wanted to make was that as a result of COVID, I think many women business owners see tech as an important, as critical, tech, automation,
enabler,
all of those things to move their business forward and to grow, but they don't identify as a tech company. So really sorting out what that is, and absolutely I'm in that space. Every woman entrepreneur I speak to, every entrepreneur I speak to is in that space. So that definition is really important.
Yeah, and one of the things the government is doing, and again, they've I think added a gender diversity lens to it, is investing in tech adoption and recognizing the adoption of technology drives innovation and growth, just as filing a new patent does. And I've always joked that, you know, I get them mixed up. Kylie Jenner was a billionaire at the age of 20, selling gunk on Shopify, basically. But she wouldn't have been invited to the table with the digital supercluster, because the way in which they were defining technological innovation was the makers of the technology as opposed to the users of the technology. And I do agree with you that I think COVID has really helped with that. Deborah, I can't see, I didn't bring my phone. I can't see my time, so I have to rely on you to help me manage this. But, you know, the deck is available. The report is available. I'm just going to blast through and try to highlight some of the kind of high level points that I think are important in policy, program design, and development, if that's okay. How am I with, where are we with time, Deborah?
We're at 12:21, but we have time built into the agenda. So Wendy, feel free to continue on, because this is exceptionally important information. And then depending on what happens at the end, Suzanne will probably you know, facilitate the Q&A if we have additional Q&A after. So I'll give you the high sign.
Okay, thanks. And I will, you know, I'm happy because it's a small group to just do Q&A as we go along. So yeah, so I think this is just more data on some of these issues. One of the things that came out of the research, though, is we do recognize that incorporated companies still have advantages. And in some respects, you know, it's better to be using other people's money to grow your business. So we have, as a result of the research, started a push to at least get women business owners to consider the advantages and disadvantages of incorporation. And this is just a whole bunch more data. We did fund a study with Brookfield, looking specifically at some of the issues around scaling up. Building on this, one of the things we really want to do, and it's very important, I think Michelle said what Vicki Saunders would say, which is we also have to challenge the assumption that growth is the be all and the end all. But again, there is a big focus on scaling up growth and so on. So what we wanted to understand was, what are some of the issues that drive growth? And more importantly, and this is a project we're doing this year, is deconstructing the women who are unicorns or have, large, very successful high growth companies, and trying to figure out, given everything we know about the barriers, what were the things that helped them succeed? So again, taking the insight around, there are all kinds of barriers to women scaling up. There are all sorts of differences in how women start as entrepreneurs, and then starting to deconstruct how did those exceptional people who get around those barriers account for their success. So this research on unicorns and soonicorns is also unfolding. And so we looked at very high growth organizations, and it's worth noting that arguably among soonicorns in Canada, although not listed in this study because she's probably not high growth, Celine Dion's worth about $800 million. And again, she wouldn't be someone that anybody would put in a list of entrepreneurs, but trying to continually challenge some of those assumptions is important. During the pandemic, we really shone a spotlight on the differentiated impacts on women and diverse groups. And it's no secret, whether you're a parent or not a parent, to know that COVID introduced a crushing burden on women who were parents, because they had the lion's share of work, as well as those who are caregivers for older family members. So the impacts of COVID, we documented, we drew to the government attention, and we showed that, again, the effects were exacerbated in rural communities and for Black entrepreneurs. And think about it, as was mentioned, the transition to digital platforms worked really well if you had internet access. And I'm not sure what the situation is in Manitoba, but in Toronto, you can go an hour and a half outside the city and you don't have a high-speed internet. So physical access is one issue, affordability is another. We did a study with Environics that showed 42% of racialized families in Toronto are challenged because of the costs of cell phones and internet. 42% of racialized children are doing their homework on a smartphone because they don't have access to high-speed internet and a computer. And you can just take those insights and apply them to women entrepreneurs. So, the ability to transition is very much affected by digital literacy and skill, digital affordability, access to infrastructure. And we know, given the fact that 50% of Indigenous people live on reserve and typically in rural and remote areas, although not always. Internet, one of the other things we really pushed was the fact that broadband infrastructure, internet access, affordability, all those things are actually a gender and diversity issue because they're so critical, whether it's enabling a business, access to education, access to healthcare. So that's another kind of policy implication of the research. And we have, lots of you have seen some of this data, but part of the reason COVID impacted women so heavily wasn't just their unpaid labor roles and the fact childcare is closed down and so forth, but also because of the sectors women entrepreneurs tend to concentrate on. The services sectors were the sectors most heavily hit, and that's part of tech grew in many cases. A lot of tech women entrepreneurs made a killing during COVID. But women are underrepresented in tech, overrepresented in services. Services hit harder by COVID. It's obvious. One of the things I do think was really important out of the work that we did, and we collaborated with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce on a she-covery report, probably not as aggressive as some of the other she-covery reports, but we had Rocco Rossi, the CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, standing up and saying childcare is not a women's issue. Childcare is an economic issue. And so again, for me, when I look at how we measure success, that was one of the things that checked the box, because you know, when it comes to a lot of this work, messengers are as important as messages. And while, you know, Vicki Saunders or I could be screaming from the rooftops about the importance of childcare, shifting that to a broadly understood economic issue as opposed to a women's issue, I think was really critical in moving the dial. So we have a whole bunch of stuff. Black women entrepreneurs, we've worked with the Black Business Professional Association for over a decade, and they were one of the original partners on a whole bunch of projects that we've done. As you know, as you add layers of diversity, the barriers tend to increase. And we did a number of projects specifically targeting Black women, including one of the largest studies that had ever been done, which was based on 700 responses. And we found what was so interesting in this work was we found, and I think you could make similar arguments probably within Indigenous entrepreneurs, is the pervasive experience of trauma and racism, no question. But the way in which many of the women entrepreneurs leverage that into opportunities. No books with Black children in the library, so I created a media company. No hair product that works for me, so I created a health and beauty company. No exercise, what do you call them? I wouldn't know, fitness facilities that cater to people like me. So I created a yoga studio focused on, you know, different body types, racialized women, and so on. So there was some really interesting findings that shed some insight, in my view, or some light on how you support Black women entrepreneurs. You're starting at a different point than if you've got, you know, someone who's middle class and has a PhD and a really well-established social network. You may be starting at a different point. And the idea of trauma-informed approaches to entrepreneurship training came out in part with this work, and also the work that had been done by Ashley and Cara and others on Indigenous women entrepreneurs. And as I mentioned, entrepreneurship is actually higher among Indigenous women than other women. And to the point that was made earlier, Indigenous entrepreneurs often won't identify with the language. You know, if you say, do you want to be a gazillionaire? Do you want to found a startup? Probably doesn't resonate as much as, do you want to create opportunities in your community? Do you want to support your community? So the social goals came out very clearly in that work, as did some of the very particular barriers around financing and, you know, the impact of the Indian Act on property ownership, et cetera, which again helped shape some of the work we're doing. We did have a focus on entrepreneurs with disabilities, particularly cognitive differences, you know, because there are lots of people who will actually say that ADHD is the entrepreneur's superpower. And entrepreneurship provides opportunities for people with cognitive differences that sort of mainstream corporate jobs may not. So there was some work on that. There was some work on the particular issues in Quebec, rural women entrepreneurs led by Gina Grandy at University of Regina, and other work out of Alberta, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of, you know, we had a whole series of reports that addressed those issues. Then we looked at the question of evaluation, because as I said, one of the things we really want to challenge is the return on investment that is normally applied to government investments in economic development and innovation, because we think it's really skewed. we think that they won't bat an eyelash at investing millions and millions and millions of dollars in startups that may or may not turn into unicorns, but getting, you know, $100,000 to be distributed among 10 Black women entrepreneurs can be difficult. And so we think that, you know, we have to continually push to show what the impact is of the work that we're doing. And so we've developed an evaluation framework. I expect that we are going to be asked to do because they've restructured the way the funding is going to flow, the women entrepreneurship strategy will not flow funds through the RDAs, the regional development agencies next time. It'll be more centrally coordinated. And I think we will play a big role in defining and measuring evaluations. So I've already talked about these issues, the definitional issues. I've already talked about the fact that sometimes there's a real skewing towards only economic impacts and not enough on social and the impact on the sustainable development goals, which is something Vicki Saunders has really pushed. And so what we did is we had a few organizations that gave us access to their data, and we were able to show, you know, so regional development agencies, you just gave $5 million to that incubator over there. What were the outcomes that you were going to get out of that? And let's look at the outcomes that $5 million invested in FEMASUR gave you with a continuous fund. So the $5 million was loans and is actually coming back. And maybe we should start to recalibrate how we set priorities for where we're putting our money. And so we looked at those metrics. SheEO was really powerful, I think, because they track impact on the sustainable development goals for all their ventures. And we think that, especially depending on the government, but if government says social impact, environmental impact, all those things are important at a strategic level, then they need to be applying that lens when they're investing in economic development and innovation. So focusing on that. And we also had data from Vancouver, thanks to Jill Earthy, on the Women Entrepreneurship Women's Enterprise Center and what the outcomes that they got were. And in every single case, I think we were able to kind of blow out of the water the kind of traditional metrics of success that they get for their investments. And so I think there may be a couple more points I'll make and then I'll stop talking. So as I said at the outset, we're really focused on trying to create a more inclusive innovation ecosystem, which means we have to, of course, support the training and the networking for individual entrepreneurs. We have to push for a diversity and inclusion lens on all the key players in the ecosystem, whether we're talking about VCs and financial institutions or chambers of commerce or universities and so on. And we have to look at some of these broader issues like government policies and processes and how we think about women entrepreneurs. So this is where we started. And of course, Suzanne's led some of the specific research on this, but you do a Google word search on entrepreneur and you probably will get some version of this. Mostly men, mostly white men in tech. And yet we know from the work that we did on the See It, Be It campaign, where we profiled 1,000 award-winning women entrepreneurs, that some like Huda Idris are in tech and very successful, but lots like Celine Dion or others are not in tech. And so making sure that our understanding of what an entrepreneur is broad enough to include more and more women is super important. And I think a lot of this I've talked about, but procurement, we're going heavy this year on procurement. We have a secondment from the federal government for 2 years, Alison Campbell, who's reaching out to some of you, to really try to drive both sides. So getting organizations, including municipal governments, large corporations, when they think about their EDI strategy to make sure they include procurement and procurement targets in there, but also to build capacity among entrepreneurs to actually engage with some of these big clients. Because if you haven't ever done an RFP for the federal government, you haven't lived. And there's a lot that can be done there. We're driving really hard on diversity and inclusion within organizations. And as I mentioned, I think we led the government's 50-30 challenge, which is focused on gender parity and increased diversity in leadership and boards. But we're arguing if you want increased diversity in leadership and boards, you have to start with the pipeline or the stream, whatever your language. I'm not supposed to use pipeline, I've been told by some, but whatever your analogy is for how you get people in the door to begin with and moving up through the ranks. I mean, we did a study that showed of 1,600 corporate board directors in Canada, there were 13 who were Black. And you're not going to fix that by just running around saying, oh, we need more Black people on boards. It's an indication of a systemic problem that starts with who's coming in the door, who's graduating from high school and so on. And so we have a whole model that focuses on that. We also pushed hard and we're successful in getting the budget to address training in SMEs and for entrepreneurs. And I lead the Future Skills Center training research, and all of the framing around skills and training was really done by large corporations and the, whatever it's called, the Business Council of Canada, big corporations. They only account for like 10 to 20% of private sector jobs. Most of the engines of growth are SMEs and entrepreneurs, and yet they were completely left out of the discussions around training. So we put a big push on that, and that's becoming kind of thought du jour, which is we have to look at training in SMEs. And that goes to things like financial literacy, but also the capacity around digital transformation, as well as EDI and so on. And then we worked with SheEO and the forum to create a sharing platform. Again, this was very much a response to immediate needs during COVID. But we have about 1,000 users now, and it's really simple. You need something, ask, you've got something, offer, and trying to match those things together. So that's sort of high level what we've done in terms of the research, but I think more importantly, what the implications are for the broader ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Wendy. Wow, such rich and detailed information. And when we think about, the questions that you've studied and also these implications, that you're now able to see these implications, which are super interesting and very impactful. So we have time for more discussion. Would anyone like to engage with Wendy? Sanjana, I see you're back. Thank you. I know you were here, but anyone have questions or want to start a conversation with Wendy in our last few minutes? Please go ahead. Joelle, what's on your mind? I'm doing what I do to my
teacher. Yeah.
Well, I love the work that Wendy does every time she speaks. Even though I've seen some of these before, every time you say something, I always learn something more. You're always adding something more. So it's just wonderful work that you're doing. So please continue. Thank you.
Thanks. The truth is, I don't remember what I said last time, so I make it up as I go along.
Wendy, we're working with the Women in Ag, and they're going to be putting on a wonderful conference in a couple of months. And one of the things that came up was, the lack of information as it relates to entrepreneurship in agriculture. And even in Gina Grande's wonderful document and everything. There don't appear to be stats. So any work that you're looking at, I mean, this impacts obviously our part of the world greatly, but any work that you're looking at that would help to, you know, kind of quantify some of the agricultural landscape?
I think that, you know, it's a really good point, and I think that probably what we should look at now that, you know, the world is somewhat open, we can actually get in and get custom runs done from Stats Canada, and that's probably the best place to get some better insight because it'll go right to the tax records and so on. I do think that one of the big issues, well, there are a few issues with agriculture, and you know, we've heard this over and over again that, you know, the image of farmer is very male dominated, but we've also heard that one of the challenges is a lot of farms are joint owned. So they're 50%, they're not 51% owned by women. And so the definitional issues around majority women owned sometimes don't apply in the cases of farms, which may then again leave some women behind who are, you know, joint owners of their businesses. So I think that's a really good point, Deborah, and something we should definitely, Suzanne's on the research committee for both WEHK and our SHIRT grant. I think we should definitely prioritize that.
Yeah, we had a very interesting conversation with Iris Mick, I think her name is, and she brought that up specifically, and that kind of information when you're talking to agricultural women could be very, very impactful, because apparently they ask for that kind of factual information, and it's just so hard to get. So thank you.
Yeah, so even drawing attention to what Wendy just said about the 51%, right? Which, you know, and if from a policy perspective, if from the way this data is gathered, we could see 50-50 ownership, right? As owning your farm, right? Co-owning, but owning it, it's 50-50. That would change the equation and give women more power in itself, right? Yes. So these experiences we had around definitional issues were very profound, right? I mean, they're straightforward, but they're very profound in terms of attention, policy change, and decision making. So I think that, you know, pointing that out strong and clear in your conference, Deborah has a conference.
Yes. Yeah.
Women in agriculture would be great. So anyone else want to speak?
Well, there's always opportunities, you know, if people think of questions that we should be looking at or specific information that would be helpful. We're always happy to do what we can. It's not that we have all the answers, but sometimes we know where the gaps are. So I really appreciate your attention.
I have a question, Wendy, quickly. So on the evaluation work, you mentioned that the Quebec Women Entrepreneurship Organization, FEMISOR, and also the Vancouver one, which I know is very forward-looking, that they helped, you know, they provided some evaluation data. Is that going to be work that continues for evaluation of these facts? And
I think, you know, one of the things with FEMISOR that's an issue is the data that we provided is based on their definition of women-led, which is a lower threshold than the 51%. So part of it is everybody's making up their own frameworks. So what we're working on is based on what information we have got, what might be a good common set of criteria that the government uses in evaluations, not to say people can't do more, but right now they don't have a common set across all the West funded projects. So it's really hard to evaluate what works and what doesn't. And I think that's really important.
Okay, I see. And I guess I would just say to everyone, as you go back to your organizations, if there are, you know, pieces of this that you would like to carry forward, or you would like, you know, Deborah and I potentially to come and talk to your organizations about some of these findings and, you know, what we can push forward in Manitoba, that's a general offer. And, you know, do think about that. And I just wondered, Kelsey, as I see you're still here, if something jumps to mind for you on the research side. Wendy, Kelsey is doing supply chain. And we did have Allison, your procurement person, talk to this group a couple of months ago. So that was great. But just before we lose Wendy, you know, I'll just throw it open again for another couple of minutes if anyone has other thoughts, follow-up questions. Go ahead.
I was excited to see that element of supplier diversity and procurement coming in. There's a lot of kind of interesting work. Actually, one of the faculty members in my department is doing some work, Paul Larson, on supplier diversity. So maybe I'll direct him to your report. But there's some interesting work too happening around, you know, social procurement and community benefits agreements that would probably work in really well with the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, no, and Paul's report was just released by CAMSI, I think, or one of the supplier diversity organizations. So yeah, and because I mean, one of the things we find is because we have so many large scale projects, like we're doing City of Markham's diversity and anti-racism strategy, you know, different part of the Diversity Institute. But naturally, we ask them to tell us about their diversity and inclusion strategy. And naturally, that gives us an opportunity to say, well, here's a leading practice that you should be thinking about. So we push at these issues, regardless of whether it's work through the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub or it's something else. And if you look at the work we did on 50/30, for instance, we snuck in supplier diversity as an indicator and a best practice, even though that's focused on boards and leadership.
Excellent, thank you. And you know, for Indigenous focused research here, we are, you know, very well positioned. And I'm thinking about the social impact, you know, in terms of some of the issue that Kelsey just raised, the questions that Kara was speaking about earlier. You know, it lends itself very well to understanding much better the social impacts of women's entrepreneurship through looking at Indigenous women. So
cool.
Anything else? Deborah, you want to have the closing words? And anyone that wants to go around and say anything to me, I'll stay here for what it's worth.
All right. Well, we are heading on to 12:51 our time. I want to say a very big thank you to both Joanne and Wendy for you know, some very interesting conversation, and it really, you know, highlights the impact of diversity, the impact of female entrepreneurship in terms of our economic well-being in Canada and everything. And I think that's what it all points to. So thank you for sharing your information today. Thank you for everybody for joining us today. And I think at this stage of the game, if there are no other comments, I think we can close it out for the rest of the time. And Dulcie, anything from your perspective, or Suzanne? And if not, we'll say thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yes, we'll see you in October, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
for
Joanne,
coming,
so
Wendy.
nice.
Thank you for coming, Joanne.
Yeah, Joanne, so
Appreciate
nice
it.
to meet you. I hope we stay in touch and bring Manitoba even further into some of what you're doing.
Would love it. Yeah.
You know, it won't be a long step to do that. I think we should take that step. And Wendy, thank you on all of our behalf.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks for including me. I really, really appreciate it. And, you know, thank you, Joanne. Suzanne, you could have you could have easily done this presentation. It was very
Not
nice
really,
to let
not
me in the
really.
room,
That's not true.
but you know, and it is really important, I think, to say that of the partners that we set up, we had when we set up WEHK, the Manitoba hub has over-delivered and overperformed on all kinds of things. So it's it really has helped us with our project, but I think hopefully it also has opened up some opportunities for new work there too. So we're going to keep working on it.
That's great. So thank you, other partners as well, Sanjana, Carolyn. So nice to have you here, Chantal and Catherine as well, if you're there. All right, have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.